So it's my turn now to interview Rob Trek from his prestigious channel.
No,
Which,
no.
So Rob, you didn't really mess with the 4/3 cameras much throughout your career. You kind of missed the whole. I got to experience it relatively heavily, and I know it seemed like they had a very different design mentality when they built these cameras. Like these were, as you can see them on the table. They're big cameras. You know, if you look at the OM1 or the OM3 or the OM4, they were the same size compared to the flagship cameras that they came out with. You're monsters cameras.
Yeah, but they still look distinctly, not this one so much, but these two distinctly have a very Olympus feel to them, look and feel. Just just a little thicker because of the mirror box.
Yeah, the E1 was definitely kind of in a class of its own. I mean, it was so different from other cameras, even at the time. It looked different. It was, of course, I think they were going for that. They were going for a camera that was, hey, this is digital. It's new, and we're redoing things. We're not following any of the film traditions of the past.
So this is the E1. Was this their first DSLR?
That was the first one right there.
So number one. Okay.
Yeah. So look through the viewfinder of that.
Yeah. It's a
small viewfinder.
It's small. I mean, compared to what I'm used to in the OM1, it's definitely smaller. Yeah. And I see 3 focus points.
And this was one of my complaints too for a long time with the system, was that the optical viewfinders were so tiny in these cameras, which is just something you can't really get around. You know, now they tried to get it around a little bit with the E3 and the E5.
Okay.
You know, they went to much bigger optics that were in them.
Let's check this out. Oh yeah, this feels twice as big.
Yeah, it's significantly bigger, but still, it pales in comparison to that tiny little OM1 down there.
Well, let's see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take the lens cap off that one. We're gonna have lens caps off everybody.
Oh man.
See how much bigger that is?
Yeah, that's...
even the E3 pales in comparison to that OM1.
Yeah. But it's, wow. Yeah, this is, as big as it is, I mean, just first impression, it's really comfortable, actually.
Oh, it is. The ergonomics in these cameras are phenomenal. The buttons were all in perfect reach. I love the button setups with these things. They were really intuitive, and they did like a lot of multi-combination buttons where like you press 2 buttons at the same time and they would do like a third function.
Okay.
Which we talked about this earlier off camera.
Yeah. Yeah, we have the push and hold buttons on the OM1 and, the modern Olympus Day cameras. But there's no combination button where you push and hold 2 things at the same time to get different things. And
which is something I miss. I think they should bring it back because it did allow you to make very fast changes to the camera.
Yeah.
Even though there's no dials, there's only 2 dials on that thing. They're 2 command dials, and that's it.
Oh yeah.
One for shutter, one for aperture.
Because my Fujifilm has some combo buttons that they probably copied from Olympus, but you push and hold 2 buttons together and that'll bring up a specific function. And I don't think that's on the OM1 or any of the modern day Olympus cameras that I'm aware of.
Well, here, I'm going to set this guy to 25 millimeter, and that one's got a 50 mm lens on it. So look through that one for a second. Now, once you've looked through that one, now despite the fact that the viewfinder is smaller, look through this one. Does the field of view look bigger?
It is. It's more like a 17, or like, well, not 17, but
it's taller. It's a taller field of view, right?
It's taller and it looks slightly. Okay, let me just try center there, and it's centered here. Oh no, it's just taller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's actually a little bit narrower, and this was one of the complaints that I had with the system. Was that a wide-angle lens, like this is the 11 to 22, it's not as wide feeling. Like, from an engineer standpoint, it's the same field of view.
Right.
Because we're measuring corner to corner of the frame.
Right.
But most people, when they think wide, they look at, that end and that end.
Right.
They're not really concerned about the tops too much. And you can even look through this guy here, too.
Yeah.
Which has a much bigger field of view. A bigger viewfinder, I should say.
Yeah, and this one is just ever so slightly tighter. I mean, each one seems to be about 1 millimeter difference, or a little bit more spread between the original film. But between these two, this seemed about a millimeter tighter on the 25 1.2 Pro than this zoomed in at 25, on the dot.
Yeah, we might not have that lens set exactly to the
Yeah,
dot. They didn't make very many fixed lenses for the 4/3 system. If they were fixed lenses, they were specialized. They were a macro lens, like the 50 millimeter f2, they were macro lens, or they would be the 300 f2.8 or something like that, with the fisheye, which we have right here. And the fisheye, this was a lens that I bought, and I was kind of like nervous. This is my first ever fisheye lens that I bought, and I thought, I was like, I'm wasting my money. I don't know why I'm buying this.
You guys should see this in person. This is really a huge front filter.
It's a big lens.
Front lens element.
And
it's got some weight.
I use this a lot.
Ooh, nice.
You can see me in there probably even at this angle.
Yeah, I can. So this field of view is about 170 or I don't know, whatever it is. It's pretty wide.
Yeah.
But it is distorted, but like fisheyes are supposed to be.
One of my beefs with this is that lens, as big as it is, as many optical lens elements it has in it, it's not even close to the quality of the tiny f1.8 8mm fisheye that we have now.
Oh, really?
I mean, it outperforms this guy in every class. Like, it's smaller, it's faster, it's half the size, it's half the weight.
True.
And yet it's several stops faster. This is f3.5.
It's almost like maybe they took a full frame design and just put it onto a Micro Four Thirds mount.
Yeah, and that was another biff that I had with the system, was that the flange distance for the 4/3 wasn't that different than 35 millimeter. Like, if you look at the lens adapter to fit an OM system manual focus lens on here, I have it. I have to dig it up, but it's tiny. It's only that thick. It's like there's like nothing. It was so they made the flange distance so deep that I think that required a lot of the lenses to be really big, because then in order to get that, because Olympus was going for lenses that would project the light straight onto the sensor rather than at an angle. And by having the lens so far away, especially with wide-angle lenses like this fisheye, it required very complicated optics. Now, on the telephoto side, it didn't matter much.
Right.
But on the wide-angle side, it definitely cost them. And if you watched my E1 video, like why I thought the camera was a failure, it was the wide-angle lenses. It was difficult for Olympus to design lenses for these cameras because of some of the boundaries that they kind of put on themselves, so to speak, in the beginning.
And honestly, this particular point kind of came up when I was doing an interview with another group. They talked about, they said they said that I was kind of the exception when it came to using Micro Four Thirds gear for architectural and real estate. That most people are using all full frame, and I said, well, that's mostly because when the 4/3 system, Micro Four Thirds systems, started coming out, you didn't have super wide angle lenses that were adequate, and you didn't have tilt shift lenses, and full frame systems had tilt shifts and super wides. And so a lot of professionals, look at these as tools. They don't care about brands, or they look at them as tools.
Yeah.
And this system just didn't have the right tools for that job. But now that we do have those, when I got into photography like in 2013, and I didn't start architectural till about 2016. And by then, we had the 7-14, we had the 8mm fisheye shortly thereafter, and we still don't have tilt shift, but we don't need it anymore because of the software, right? We can do tilting and shifting in software with the keystoning. Anyway, but yeah, to your point, this 8mm fisheye is definitely much bigger and heavier and slower. It's an f3.5 versus the 1.8 on the modern fisheye.
And they're using the same format. They're both 4/3.
Yeah, it's not because of the sensor size.
Yeah. It's because of the flange distance was so long. And they also made the bayonet on these things huge. I mean, you look at the amount of room that is around that sensor.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just this huge amount of room around it. I think that they were expecting that, because here's the thing, this actually bit a lot of companies in the butt. And it even bit Olympus too. It's like when they made the OM1, they made it so compact that when autofocus came out, there was no room in here to connect and basically add all the features that you needed
for
autofocus to work. and I think they kind of overcorrected, so to speak, when they went 4/3, because then they made it really big, expecting, okay, oh, there's got to be something else that's going to come along, but really nothing else has besides autofocus.
Right. And well, I think sort of a side advantage might have been it gave us more room to have incredible IBIS now.
It does. It does.
So
mirrorless 4/3 here is smaller, but still has plenty of room. And that actually brings up a good point, because I think that Canon and Nikon both have dug themselves into a little bit of a hole that they're going to regret later on, because they made the flange distance on theirs so short that it limits how much tilt can be put into the image sensor.
Yeah.
Because they're so close to that lens. And that might be something that down the years here they're going to realize, because that's actually something that I would love to see built into one of these newer cameras, is the ability to tilt the actual sensor via maybe a joystick or something like that, and get some of those tilt channel and pan and tilt and pan movements.
Right.
With any lens that you have. Basically any lens could then be a tilt pan lens.
Exactly. And
with this, with the 4/3 system, there's just enough room there to do that. So I really like the MFT lens. I mean, to me, it's really, they got it right this time.
Yes.
They definitely got it right with MFT. With this, there were some mistakes that were made. They made some things too big. They overcompensated in a few areas, which you could see. It's just obvious just looking at the size difference of these cameras.
I know, and the OM1's not a small camera in modern terms, right? And this is substantially larger. This is like very similar to the Lumix S5 and S5 II, a lot more comfortable than those.
Yeah, the ergonomics are definitely better.
But in terms of size, this is easily full frame size camera. But
I think that's one of the reasons why Olympus, with their lenses at least, they tried so hard to compete with full frame cameras. Like they came out with that, I think it was the 14 to 35 f2, and then there was the 35 to 100 f2. Those were they were in a speed race trying to get the same kind of performance as a 35mm camera by doing the optics. But they had working against them, the flange distance was too long and so forth. And so it just wasn't working out quite right from an engineering standpoint. Yeah, I really like this camera though. This is the E30. They are awesome cameras, really. And they're the E3. So between these two, which is the better camera? The E3 is older, so the E30 I think would be considered a better one. I need to get an E5, but they're still so expensive. I mean, fully articulating screen. Yeah, on both of those cameras. And, just buttons galore and ergonomics that are just, right in line with everything Olympus OM Systems is doing. Yeah, these cameras were designed to be working cameras. This is for somebody who shoots all day long. And I mean, they're big and heavy. I can't imagine carrying them all day long. Yeah, I mean, it's not terrible, right? Yeah. But it's certainly bigger than the OM1. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of similarity in design and feel to the OM1 that I use now, or that we both use. And I miss the top plate LCD on cameras, but yeah, which is in every single one of these. Even the E1s had a top plate LCD. Yeah. Because it's kind of nice just to be able to look down at the camera and just see your settings. I get it. The settings are on the back of the screen, but you can just kind of look down even before you pick up the camera. I think a lot of that stems from the days when photographers would carry two cameras on them. And because if you've got two cameras hanging around your waist, you can look down and instantly see the top plate LCD. Right. Whereas today, a lot of photographers are only carrying one camera now. For just somebody using one camera, this kind of works fine. Right, you can get away with that easily. But if you've got two cameras or three cameras strapped around you, then a top plate is really handy to you pick it up and you already know what your settings are, and you could like, let's say if I have this down here and I've got camera A that I put down and camera B that I put down, and I pick it up, I can already start making adjustments to the camera while I'm bringing it up to the eye, because of the feedback that I have from that top plate. That's kind of why that was so popular and wasn't a necessity back in the day. And now you kind of don't really see it in today's cameras anymore. Well, for me, it's more about redundancy and seeing something, because a lot of times I miss settings because I didn't notice that it was set that way, right?
And just picking up the camera and seeing it here, you get one checkbox in your mind, and then when you bring it up to your eye and you look through the EVF, there's a few more settings there that maybe you forgot to look for when you were looking here. So that redundancy, you might even make, for me, I would make less mistakes if I, got used to using a top plate LCD again. Because there's so many times I picked up a camera and I missed a setting because, I just wasn't paying attention or whatever. But anyhow, I'm a fan of this. But hopefully they can bring that back eventually in an OM1X maybe.
Yeah, there's definitely room up there for one. Now this is the 50 to 200 f2.8 f3.5, which, based on the lens roadmap, we're going to see a lens similar to this.
Yes.
Which is exciting because this is a very versatile focal length range.
It is.
It's much better than the 70 to 200s that you see, or which would be
well, this would be 100 to.
Yeah, this would be equivalent to 100 to 400.
Right.
Essentially, this is talk about a great sports lens, and that's what these things were hailed as, is great sports lens. This one has a mechanical linkage to the focus, which was not something that we've seen too often.
Right.
I think for this system, most of the pro-end lenses, the high-end ones, did have, in fact, a mechanical linkage if they were the blue band.
Okay.
So,
this is, I think this is an acceptable compromise with focal length 50 to 200 and aperture of 2.8 to 3.5, because the 40 to 150 2.8 is significantly larger than this lens, in terms of length, and it doesn't have as much reach. Granted, fixed 2.8, and as photographers, we're not too stuck on having a fixed aperture. Those are for video guys usually, but I would compromise, a third of a stop to get that extra 50 millimeters on the long end. So I'm looking forward to the 50 to 200 or maybe 50 to 250. I feel like that would be a much more versatile range, because 40 to 150, I have the kit zoom one version, and I always feel like I could just use a little more reach, sometimes. And I don't want to get the 40 to 150 2.8 because it's really so big. So I hope they can make the 50 to 250 or 200 compact. And I wouldn't mind a slight compromise, like a third of a stop on the f stop. I
also hope it's white.
Yeah?
I really hope it's white. Having used white telescopes versus black telescopes, there's an enormous difference thermally, the way lenses perform when they're white.
Well, I heard it was because of the fluorite in some of the lenses. Fluorite's very sensitive to temperature.
Yeah. Any special optical glasses are going to be more reactive to thermal changes than typical glass. So ED, fluorite, any low dispersion glass, any LD glass, whatever companies call it, if it's an obtuse, non-normal type of glass like flint or flint glass, it's going to be more reactive to heat. And that's one of the reasons why you'll sometimes see radical differences in one person's lens test versus another. And it could be that one's out in the sun testing it in the hot sun, and the other person's in the studio where it's under controlled 65 degrees climate conditions.
Yeah.
So
and that's that's why you really want to see. I prefer tests that are done in real life.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, but you're right. I didn't come into photography until 2013 myself, right? That was my first foray into an interchangeable lens system. So I missed this entire thing. In fact, I was actually looking at the original EM1 and comparing that against other systems, but it was priced just out of my range at the time. But these certainly, today, I would still consider, because these are CCD sensors, I believe.
Yeah.
Because most stuff before 2010 was CCD. And these would make great cameras, I think. Just because, what did you pay for this one? Like $150 or something?
Yeah, this one right here. I got this with a battery grip for, I think it was $170. And it's one of the few purchases I've made since cancer, because I, obviously have not been working as much and therefore not bringing in as much income.
But this is a 12 megapixel.
That one's 12 megapixels.
CCD sensor, which is more than enough. and you get that sort of original CCD look that people talk about all the time. And there is a difference. I think it's more in the color science they use with the CCD sensors more than the sensor itself, because
Yeah.
the sensor is digital, right? And it's organically collecting things, but the color and stuff is all processed digitally. But you don't find that anymore, because back then, from the old articles I read, they really tried to get colors closer to the film look.
Mm-hmm.
Versus cameras today, they try to make the colors more accurate, right? But anyhow, yeah, I think, this is definitely
The E1s were very often compared to Kodak Ektachrome 100.
Mm, yeah, I
like
can
in
see that.
color saturation and the way they kind of reacted to things.
Yeah, I can see that, because there's definitely a difference in the look. I mean, even when because I have an E500 that I bought a couple of years ago, and I've only taken it out once or twice. But even when I white balance corrected the images against, say, the EM1 Mark III, the colors were still different. And again, I attribute that to the color science more than the sensor itself. But finding that kind of color science, you do have to go back like 2010 or earlier, and they just happen to be CCD sensors.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion. Don't quote me on that. But I love these cameras. I think I'm definitely, I don't know, I definitely need to take out my E500 more. And
I know we have two identical E1s here, and I wish we had some time to like go out and do a photo walk with those cameras and just kind of like really nostalgia, see like, wow, this is what it was like 20 years ago, and take pictures with cameras.
I know. I don't know if I could go back this far personally with just a flat.
Yeah.
You can't flip this out at all, right? And a camera like this,
you're very dependent on that viewfinder.
Yeah, you're kind of locked in. I don't know if these have real live view or not.
They do. They do.
Okay.
They got to flip their mirror up, so there's a delay.
Oh, okay. Okay. So then, then if it didn't have live view, why make this screen flip, right? So it makes sense intuitively. But you can't assume that. Always double check any vintage camera you're looking at. Because one of my cameras does not have live view. That's really old. And I only have the one. So this lens here, this is looks like a wide
angle. This is the 12 to 22. 11 to 22.
11 to 22. Wow.
And that was, for a while, that was the widest lens Olympus made.
This is also a 2.8 to 3.5.
Mm-hmm. So
again, this is probably, if they were to do the same thing today, they could probably make this a lot smaller.
Oh yeah, much smaller.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess, what do you think? Do you think it's because of the video side of things, people are always wanting that fixed aperture, or is there some photography advantage? Because personally, I don't see it. But
fixed aperture has always been something that people have lusted after, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But in the real world of photography, it doesn't matter. And even the best photographers say, "Oh yeah, I would love to have a fixed zoom aperture lens," but really, this variable one does the same thing, and it does it just fine.
Yeah, because I think in photography, and I'm talking speakly for myself, is the field of view is what's important, right? Just because the aperture changed a little bit from a wider field of view to a smaller one, doesn't matter.
It only really affects you if you're changing focal lengths a lot at maximum aperture.
Mm-hmm.
Because then typically you find yourself setting it to the smaller app. So this is an f2.8 to f3.5. If I was at a game shooting basketball, which is what I use this lens a lot for,
mm-hmm.
well, then I would typically set my aperture to f3.5.
Yeah, I guess.
And then I would shoot the entire game that way.
Yeah, and if you're shooting full manual and you zoom out, you're going to have to adjust your shutter speed or ISO because of that. So I get it if you're a manual shooter, but if we're just shooting an aperture priority or shutter priority.
So yeah, so I'm going to get out. So these are some relics that you won't see in any new camera systems anywhere. These are very magnifiers that hook up to the optical viewfinder of your camera.
Mm-hmm.
And today you just don't see this anymore because we have LCD screens that magnify even more, and we get the flip out screen.
So you think a lot of people got these because of the magnify function?
Yes.
As much as it is just bringing the view up away from the camera.
And this was like for macro work or copy work. Back when cameras were used to copy things. They're not quite used to do that more. Now we have like flatbed scanners and so forth. And the old OM system one is built like a tank. It's all metal.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's.
They just don't make anything like they used to. It seems sometimes.
I know.
Right. I mean, it's nothing like picking up like a cold piece of steel or not steel, but whatever this is,
Aluminum.
you know, in your hands. Even though ergonomically it's a nightmare, it's really, you know, it's very satisfying at the same time, right? Versus, you know, I'm picking up this viewfinder, which is all plastic, and I'm picking up this one, which is really nice metal. Anyhow, it is what it is. But you know, I think the Panasonic, the Lumix GX9 or G9 and G8s, they had the flip up EVF, and that's, I think, harkens back to the reason a lot of people got these. Is I guess there is some very wow, so clear. There, I'm using it without the camera, but there's definitely use cases and application. Give you extra versatility, right? With your camera without doing anything, you know, to the camera or the image.
And I bought these because of astrophotography. That's why I got them. Because with astrophotography, you really got to nail focus perfectly. And back then, with these like with those cameras, you had sometimes the diamond type prism in the middle or the split prism, or you could get them with there were even focusing screens that were specifically made for these just for astrophotography. They were clear. They had nothing. There was no matte to them whatsoever. But you had to use one of those to check your focus.
Right.
Now these guys here, the autofocus era, we kind of saw that split prism item that was in most focusing screens kind of disappeared altogether.
Yeah.
And so in that case, well, once again, you kind of needed to depend on one of these if you were manually focusing and you were trying to get like exact focus on stars with these.
Right. Yeah. This doesn't have that split focus or.
Yeah. Because we were more dependent upon autofocus at this point for most of our needs, and which kind of unfortunately left astrophotographers like me out.
You know, I think I'm just noticing some other differences. There's definitely a big jump in design.
Oh yeah, the team that designed the E1 was a completely different team that designed the E3, the E30, all the cameras that came afterwards.
I mean, it was definitely a leap forward.
And there was a big gap too between, like, so this camera came out in 2003. I think this one didn't come out until 5 years later. So like the E3, there was a big gap between them, and it was actually kind of infuriating to me because here I was using their Pro-End cameras. I had 2 of them, and I was at 5 megapixels. And back then, cameras were jumping megapixels all the time. Yeah. And I have clients and customers ask me how many megapixels is that? And I had to say 5. Yeah. But then like grandma would be there with her new little Rebel that was 6 or 8, you know, or 10. And it got to a point, I think the E410 came out. It had a 10 megapixel camera sensor in it. Twice as many megapixels as my E1. But that was an amateur camera. That was the lowest bottom tier camera. And this, I think, is something that, as a manufacturer, if you're watching this and you're a manufacturer, don't do this to your professionals. Don't put higher end features and higher end components into consumer grade cameras and then leave out the professionals, because that ticks us off and makes us want to move systems. And that was the one time that I was seriously considering looking at another system, because I felt like I had been forgotten as a professional. Now, with the newer 4/3 system, I think Olympus has done a good job of not doing that. Like, for example, there was rumors for a little while that the OM5 was coming out. Was going to have the same sensor in it as the OM1. But they didn't do that. They kept a previous generation sensor, which me as a professional, that makes me feel good about my camera.
Interesting. That's sort of a because I've heard different philosophies that just have one camera system and just different form factors, right? And that would probably make the price point very similar across the board. But yeah, I wouldn't mind like an OM5 that costs almost as much as the OM1 because it's a much smaller form factor. How would you feel about something like that versus?
Oh, I mean, like basically condensing everything down to a smaller size and still having all the same features. Like, if it was like that, I would expect the price to be kind of indicative of the feature sets that it has.
Right, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Price point would probably be similar, maybe a little less, but...
Well, here's another thing, though, to consider, is that you know, I hear a lot of people complain about size. Well, why can't they make it smaller? Okay, if it's a pro-handed camera, it has to be a certain size because it has to fit your hand. Pros, we hit and touch the buttons all the time. Okay,
Yeah.
somebody with their cell phone, like, hand me your cell phone over there. Okay, I mean, this has got a couple cameras in it. There is nothing ergonomic or user-friendly whatsoever about
Right.
this. Nothing. Okay, when you press the thing to like start the exposure, you knock it, it moves around. Your fingers get in the way of the camera all the time. The lenses and so forth. This is just ergonomically a nightmare. This breaks every single rule of ergonomics, but it's small.
Right. And there's that.
This doesn't break a single rule of ergonomics. Everything is perfectly laid out, perfectly within reach, and you can manipulate and operate this very quickly. I can change settings on this way faster than you can on that phone.
Certainly. If you can change the setting at all.
Yeah, if you can change the setting at all.
Right.
And that comes with size. That size has to come with that. And so, like, I see a lot of people comparing 35mm camera with a Michael Four Thirds camera, and they're saying, "Oh, it's just as big." Well, you know, usually that's not completely true. They're still smaller.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you made this smaller, it wouldn't be practical to use.
Right. And there's a lot to be said for, you know, functionality of a camera, usability, and quality, right?
Mhm.
And one is not necessarily superior to the other, right? So definitely this loses when it comes to functionality and quality and you know, usability, right? It fails on all of those, but it wins on convenience, right?
Yeah.
And so again, that doesn't make this inferior in any way. It just makes it different because it shines when it comes to convenience. Now this one, of course, obviously loses on convenience, right?
Yeah, the size.
But you gain a lot with what? Functionality, ergonomics, right? And quality for
And
that
performance.
matter. And
Pure performance.
Right. So it's like I said again, it doesn't make this superior to this, right? It's just different.
Yeah.
And it depends what you value more. And obviously consumers just doing snapshots, they're going to value convenience over functionality, but professionals, and that's why, you know, these cameras are attractive to me, even though I could probably even get better quality out of this these days. Who knows? But you know, the experience of using a professional grade camera, I think, would trump convenience in my case.
I'm trying to think, what are the last couple of things? So, computational photography with 4/3 was really
Was it a thing or
not a thing at all. I would say. I don't think we have any really computational photography features in these cameras. Maybe the very latest ones might have live comp or live bulb, but that'd be about it.
So this is the E30. Let's see what this has. This has a menu button somewhere, I assume. Here.
Yep.
So wow, it looks really similar. We have shooting menu number 1, shooting menu number 2, and this is where sometimes you find the computational stuff. So let's see. Bracketing, white balance bracketing. What is FL bracketing?
Oh, that'd be flash. Flash bracketing.
Flat, duh.
Back when people used flash, folks.
Yeah, I don't do flash bracketing. And then ISO bracketing and multiple exposure. So I don't see anything computational there, really.
What are those buttons? Big, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, they're very tactile. And they're not that much bigger, really, than
Maybe it's spaced out a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely the spacing and the tactileness, right? They're more clicky rather than soft.
I can hear them click. Whereas these, there's no click in any of these.
AF mode. Yeah, I don't see anything computational here. I thought maybe live comp or something, but I don't see anything here. So it's definitely not a thing. But we have picture modes. Vivid, natural, muted, portrait, all that's the same. Custom, gradation. We can shoot RAW or JPEG.
Those fine Olympus JPEGs.
Yeah. CCD JPEG. Yeah, metering. So we have ESP, center weighted, spot high, spot low.
And something else I want to comment on here is that when I ever went to a job with these cameras, I never got questioned about, the professionalism of the gear.
Yeah.
Never once.
Well, these look like any pro camera.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they do.
You know?
And here's another interesting thing. So, like, if you go to a job with like a Nikon or a Canon, odds are people are familiar with those. And if their uncle has a camera that's maybe one model newer than yours, they're going to bring it up. But odds are, even though like I was running around with the E3 for a while, which was quite outdated because E5 was out, and then the EM5 came out, and it was even more outdated. But still, nobody ever like said, "Oh, the EM5 is more up to date," because it's a smaller, less known ecosystem, so to speak. There wasn't that much. There's not that much gravitas to it.
Right.
It's kind of with these cameras, you can kind of be an incognito, secret agent kind of professional photographer, so to speak.
I like this has SD card and compact flash. That's cool.
Yeah, the E3 had, what was it here? CF and then XD.
XD,
which was an Olympus.
right?
That was something that Olympus tried to make take off, and they never really failed. They failed to do it. The cards were just too small, didn't hold enough pictures.
I'm sorry. So this is this XD or SD? I can't read that.
CF,
CF.
so compact flash, and
was-
then
that looks like an
yeah, that's XD. XD.
XD. So it's not even SD. Okay.
Yeah.
Ah. Man, I have an XD card actually.
I've got one or two. That's
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, but the compact flash was, I guess, the standard.
Back then, yeah, that was
Yeah.
the standard back then. Everybody had compact flash.
Right.
Yeah.
These are wonderful cameras. I mean,
They're an interesting and unique kind of era for Olympus.
yeah.
I think they accomplished a lot of things, and they did really kind of progress photography in a lot of respects, especially autofocus speed. There was a couple times when these cameras were the fastest autofocus cameras out there, and it kind of pressured a lot of the other industry to kind of step up on autofocus speed, which was a good thing.
Yeah, and
And they introduced live view, or through the LCD screen
Right.
with these cameras, and that's something now is standard across all cameras. You would be hugely chastised if you came out with a camera today that didn't have that feature.
wow. And once you take the grip off, it's really the same size as any DSLR of its day.
Mhm.
And that maintains the handling I think a lot of professionals were comfortable with.
Yeah.
Right, and familiar with. Because that's something you notice right away, going from full-size DSLRs or even digital, DSLRs, which that's the D, right?
Mm-hmm.
to like say an OM5, right? It's like, wow, there's a massive difference in size.
Mhm.
And that may be why pros, didn't go micro four thirds as much, because it just didn't have that same feel. But this has all the feel and look and features and everything. It's just, I think whatever you pointed out as to why these didn't really take off. What were your thoughts on that originally?
My thoughts was the flange distance was too long,
Mm-hmm.
and optically the viewfinders were just too inferior.
Yeah, looking through here is very small.
For professionals to feel comfortable with this,
Right.
it doesn't really work out very well. Even the E3, as big as its viewfinder is, it pales in comparison to that OM1 from the 1970s.
Yeah. And this would be comparable to the full frame SLRs of its day in terms of,
And I know when I was looking at the MFT system and considering whether or not I would upgrade, jump into the system, the EM5, I didn't, because of the viewfinder. The viewfinder wasn't bigger and it wasn't sharp enough for me, relative to my E3. And it wasn't until the EM1 came out, and it held only one thing that I was interested in. I bought that EM1 Mark I for one reason only, and that was because the viewfinder was improved. That was the only reason I bought it. And when the EM1 Mark II came out, I didn't buy that camera initially because it didn't have an improved viewfinder.
right.
And the same thing with the EM1 Mark III. At first, once I tried it, I bought it because of the astrophotography features that it had.
Right.
But it was the EM1X was the only one that had the improved viewfinder. And I wish I'd known that.
Mm.
Because if I'd known that, I actually would have bought the EM1X brand new.
Yeah, and I think you echo a lot of people's thoughts when it comes to decision making on a camera. Or what are the ergonomics, usability, user experience, and definitely EVF is a big one, and that's why a lot of cameras now, like the OM1, has a 5.7 million or whatever. It has more megapixels than this camera, or what the E1.
Yeah, the viewfinder has more megapixels than
Than
the
this-
actual sensor of the E1.
right these days, and
You know,
and it does make a difference. When I first got to OM1, I didn't appreciate how good the viewfinder was, but now when I go back to lesser viewfinders, I'm like, wow, it does make a difference in the user experience. And I don't know if, I mean, I could, but
especially finding focus.
yes,
Like if you're manually focusing, you need that high resolution.
yeah,
You know, you've got to have that, and that was actually something that, like, these cameras, I had to be very dependent upon the autofocus in these cameras because the viewfinders were so small. It was very difficult to see whether or not I was in focus or not.
yeah,
You know, and thank goodness they had deeper depth of field, so it made it a little bit more forgiving.
right,
But at the same time, you were kind of slave to that autofocus, which wasn't that great. Okay, so it's nothing compared to today's autofocus for sure.
right. But it's it was sometimes a guessing game,
Mhm.
right? You didn't have that sort of confidence in the autofocusing systems in its day.
Yeah, definitely. It was so many shots were missed because autofocus was off.
Right, and but I don't know. I think when you're talking about this, and I bought my 12 to, I forget which lens it was, but I bought one of the more popular, better zoom lenses. Normal focus. It was 12 to 40, give or take.
Mhm.
And it was a 2.8 to something. It wasn't a fixed aperture lens, but it's very well regarded for 4/3 cameras.
Was it
And-
this one, the 14 to 54? Or did you get the 12 to 60?
I think it was the 12 to 60 because it started at 2.8, if I recall.
That's a lens I should add to the collection, but I'm not really buying a lot of stuff right now.
Mhm. Yeah, but I don't. I only paid like $100 for that lens, and the E500 I think I paid 40 or 50 bucks for,
Mhm.
and so for a couple $100 you can get into a really fun little camera system to go out and just play around with and have that CCD experience, right?
Mhm.
And that nostalgia. And honestly, you're not going to get any lesser image quality overall than any other camera system. When it comes to just general photography and enjoying photography, there's, I think, if anything else, just going out and enjoying photography again. That's what these cameras can do for very little money.
Yeah, those E1s were fun.
Mhm.
They were different. I would say, though, that my OM1s, the
Mhm.
film ones, were the most fun.
Mhm.
There was something magical about developing the film, waiting for it to come,
Yeah,
and then getting the images. Even though the E1s kind of outperformed them in every single way imaginable.
yeah.
And
It's funny how film's kind of coming back when there's a lot of overhead with film.
yeah.
I just bought 2 rolls. It was like $20
Oh
just
my.
to buy 2 rolls. I was like, come on. And then I can develop it myself, so I saved some money there. But wow. So there's a financial overhead. So you're pretty much committed financially when you start with film.
Well, so here's a fun fact. So traditionally film grain and quality and
Mhm.
ISO performance of film doubled every 10 years. So in other words, like in the 80s, ISO 50 film was the thing.
Mhm.
In the 90s, ISO 100, you could get the same quality with ISO 100 film. And then the 2000s hit, we had the digital revolution, and film development stopped.
Mhm.
Nobody's trying to make better film. They're just running the same processes
Yeah.
they were before. So in theory, I mean, we should be able to use ISO 400 and get the same quality as ISO 50 was back in the 80s. But because they stopped producing and no R&D went into it anymore.
Yeah. But the film is definitely one of those things where you're doing it just specifically for that film look.
Yeah.
And the experience of shooting and doing photography. It's not anything I don't know if you could use professionally unless that's your sort of signature in portrait photography or something.
Oh, trust me, there are companies and firms that like their
Yeah.
film. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of them are used in large format or half
Mhm.
format.
Yeah.
You know, and by the way, originally full format was 8x10, not 35 millimeter.
Yeah.
You know, anything less than that was considered a crop of that.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of where things have gone. You know, the sensors have gotten smaller,
Yep.
not bigger. You know, the market always wants to go smaller. If you look at through history, you know, originally cameras were what 14 by 11-inch negatives. They
Right.
were huge, you know, and then they got smaller and smaller and smaller until they were that size right there, that OM1.
Yeah, and it's the same idea, right? They want to get it into hands of people every day. You know, that was at least the theory behind, or the inspiration behind this camera was to get it into the hands of the average person to do
Mhm.
photography, keeping it affordable and compact, easy to carry with you, and that philosophy is carried on through OM systems, which I
Mhm.
really like. I mean, looking at all these on the table now, you wouldn't think so, but that is the case.
These were targeted towards professionals.
Yes.
And
Yes.
like we spoke earlier, you've got to have a certain size camera in order to have all the buttons and everything in reach.
Right.
These are not casual use cameras. These are hardcore, and they're kind of fun to get out today and
Yeah.
re-image with, and kind of like, oh, this is what it was like, you know, 20 years ago. You know, this was the cheese 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I don't miss, like, if I were to take these out, like when I took my E500 out, I don't miss the touchscreen at all, because I like the physical buttons to everything when I can
Mhm.
do it. Even if I have to navigate through a deep menu, I'd rather do that than mess with a touchscreen,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to control the camera. And that's why I don't like these. That you know, the compromise to ergonomics and usability trump the convenience for me on this. It's almost like I'd rather not even take a picture with this, rather than have to take it out and try and use it. Whereas, you know, if I have this on me, I'll always get the picture or try to take the picture right when I can. But the question is, do I take it with me every day? So
I have a camera in my bag and it goes with me everywhere.
yeah, I generally try to have a camera with me every day. You know, hence the everyday camera term,
Mm-hmm.
and that's usually the Pen F in my case.
A Pen F, yes.
Yeah.
You have two of those, don't you?
Yes. Yeah.
Lucky.
Uh,
Yeah.
Says the guy with a cabinet full of these, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, these are just like me buying professionally throughout the years, and I've never
Mhm.
let go of any of them. You know, like so
Yeah.
some of them have gone to friends and relatives to be used for a little while.
Mhm.
Like my sister uses some of my cameras,
Yeah.
so that not all of my cameras are here. You know, she's got a couple of them. But, you know,
Yeah, I thought I had a lot of stuff, and now I'm like, you
we
know.
haven't even gotten into my film OM cameras.
Right, right.
Those are the jewels.
Yeah.
Those are jewels.
Yeah, I have the OM1 myself and an OM2S.
Mm-hmm.
Those were, the OM2S was one of my cameras I used in college, and then shortly thereafter, I took a long hiatus from photography.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple of point and shoots, but it wasn't, like I said, from college back in the mid 80s to 2013. I hardly did any photography.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I missed out on all this really amazing stuff.
Yeah, these were amazing cameras and lenses. They like, especially some of the telephotos. I'm just amazed that wildlife photographers did not gravitate to this system.
Yeah.
But Olympus never really tried to like kind of promote it for wildlife photography, even though like they had that 300 f2.8, they had the 50 to no, it was a 90 to 250 f2.8, which a bunch of those have jumped up on eBay here all of a sudden here recently. I think there are people that are buying the new 150 to 400 are selling their older cameras and their older lenses.
Right.
Because Olympus now has a second production line for the 150 to 400. That has changed since my last video I did about it.
Interesting.
Yes, so they now the cycle time for when you order one to when you get one is a lot shorter. You'll get one in about a month now.
Good.
So
Good.
you want that dream lens, and it really is. That is a dream lens right there.
Yeah, that definitely. I haven't heard anybody say one bad thing about that lens. Not a lens I'll probably ever be able to get, but
yeah, the only people I've seen that have been selling them are people that are dying can't get out and do photography anymore, which is terrible to say.
Yeah.
But you know, hey, I'm fighting cancer stage 4, so I guess I have a little bit of room to say that.
Right. I mean, I think the closest thing to that lens is the 300 f4 in terms of the kind of image quality you're going to get from the OM Systems cameras. This is, until the 150 to 400 came out, I feel like this may have been their pinnacle lens in terms of image quality.
And hardly is anything said about it too, which is shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't get the gravitas that I think, excuse me, it deserves.
Yeah, because a lot of times I see comparisons of the OM System cameras, but they're always taking out the big guns, right? The 150 to 400, not the kind of lens that, you know, at least some of us can have access to, this 300 f4.
Yeah, because that lens is like less than half the cost.
Yeah, and you can find them used for like 2,000 or less, and it's there's probably a more realistic price for this, but with inflation and everything, 3,000. This thing is now 3,000. That's a big nut to crack. But either way, if you get this lens, I don't think you'll have any regrets once you own one.
You're making me want one, Rob.
Yeah, I know. It's really, this is a lens that is, I wouldn't say keeping me in the OM system, but it's making it very hard to think about other systems when I know I have this lens. Because, as you know, there's lots of systems, and I own lots of different cameras, some full frames, you know, Lumix and Fuji and Canon. I just sold off all my Canon stuff, actually. Nikon. I have them all. But this is the system of choice for me, and this lens is one of the reasons.
And you know what? That you bring up something really good. Choose a system for the lenses that you can get for it. You know, in the old film days, that's what everybody preached. That's what anybody was told. What system should I get? Look at the lenses that are in that system, the ones that you can afford, that you can get. That is the system for you to get.
Yes.
Build your camera around the lenses. Well, I should say, build a lens portfolio, and whatever cameras the manufacturers happen to make, so be it. Okay, that's really, you shouldn't be chasing systems based on cameras. And I feel like since digital, we've gotten to this stage where all photographers will jump from one brand to the next because of a change in the camera, and forget about all the lenses that they have accumulated.
I know. Think about it. Do you ever see a video thumbnail, and I'm talking about YouTube, where it says, "I'm changing system because of this lens"?
Yeah, nobody says that. Nobody does that anymore. And that should be the reason that you do it. That should be the one reason.
Yeah, if any. Because, like I said, this lens and this system, if this lens were not available, it'd be a tough call for me at this point. Because, like I said, I have a lot of camera systems. It's similar focal lengths, but none of them have access to this kind of lens with this kind of reach on this, you know, all of that. I get it. You know, you can just buy a high resolution camera and crop in with the same kind of focal length, but it's not the same. It's really not. There's nothing else in the camera world, I think, like this, a 300 f4 and an OM1, in my opinion, for its wildlife tracking capability for birding. I can speak to specifically is amazing.
So with that in mind, let's try to wrap this up. So I think with this system, Olympus developed a great portfolio of lenses for it eventually. Eventually, there was, like, you know, everything that a photographer could want was available in the system. But we had this mindset of the major populace that we'd buy a camera or a system based on the camera rather than the lenses, which is backwards. It really should be the other way around. You should look at the lenses first and then consider the cameras. And I think if that demographic had not changed, this system might have been more successful than it was. And today, though, I mean, Olympus is doing a good job with the camera bodies, keeping them up to date.
Yeah.
You know, staying on top of things technology-wise. I mean, the OM1 has definitely been a big success for Olympus.
Yes.
And they got some great lenses they've come out with since then and are going to continue to. And that's really what it's all about. So, buy for the lenses, not the camera body.
I second that.
Yeah, all right. All right. Thanks, Rob.
All right. Thanks, Ben.